When silence as spirituality is conceived of as the only appropriate way to be gathered as a body before God, are we using silence to create space for God, or are we using silence to silence people who make us uncomfortable?
Welcome to Created Creative. I'm Dawn.
And I'm Ruth.
Happy Easter.
Happy Easter. Yeah,
Woo-hoo.
I know. How long does your mom get to stay?
We had thought she'd come in the spring at some point, but then 2 Thursdays ago, I just was like, now is the time. I called her on Thursday and she was willing to come on Saturday, 2 days later. So
yay.
nice.
That's awesome.
And Easter, it's always fun to have her because we have an Easter egg hunt in Central Park, and that's pretty unique. Like the church Easter hunt is in
nice.
Central Park.
Yeah.
And also Lucy's baptism birthday is Easter.
Nice.
So yes, we've been having adventures. And we rented a car to go to local malls. I don't have a car in New York City.
Yeah.
And we go to this mall that had a Sesame Street place, and it was on Tuesday, which we were available for because no dance class like we've had the last 3 months on Tuesday. And we're at this place at a random mall in New Jersey that we've never been to, that you needed a car to get to. And we saw a girl from the dance class.
Oh my gosh.
There's 3-year-old Sylvia playing the Sesame plays.
Sylvia, I love that.
So that was crazy, but she loved the climbing and was scared of Big Bird. He's so big.
He's so big.
He's quite a bit taller than me.
Yeah, right.
Whatever they're doing. But Elmo, she was all about. She went right up to him and wasn't scared.
She wouldn't go up to Big Bird?
No.
He's terrifying.
What is your anything special to report?
Easter was phenomenal. Let's see what's happening right now. I'm just in the thick of my youngest is getting so close to graduation now and prom and all these things. And so we were just having a heart-to-heart about what he wants to do. And it's exciting, but also scary. And I remember that feeling of what's it going to be like? But he's doing good. And otherwise, yeah, we've just been in the thick of Holy Week. But we're finally in the Easter season and spring is here and new creation everywhere.
The spring always feels like a creative time. And if you are with us in the Northern Hemisphere, it's like the world is being created right now.
Yes.
And we want to share in it.
Yeah. I don't know if people know about our new Patreon.
I don't know that they do. Yeah, lots of podcasts have Patreons. We're wanting ours to be a community that encourages each other's creativity, whether it's your main thing or a side thing or a secret thing.
Yeah. And it's been something that our guests have talked so much about and our listeners too. It just seems like community is a theme that has come up an awful lot. And we'd like foster that in whatever way we can. So that's how the idea of this Patreon came together.
We would love to be just a little part of the internet that is creating positive, affirming, progressive, creative community.
Yes. And we so enjoy all the people that we've been talking to, and we want to build on that. It's been really fun to see the ways that we've connected with each other, and I'd love to see more of that happen too.
So the Patreon has 3 levels. $5, you get a limited edition sticker designed by Ruth Hetland. I don't even know what else you could possibly need in your life.
Yes.
$10, you get to be a part of our creative containers. We're going to gather once a month starting in May, meaning we're all getting on Zoom. We're doing a group creative fun thing. Then we're all going to work on what we're doing. And then we have a very positive show and tell.
Yes, you get to meet other creatives from around the globe and be inspired.
Yes. And then at the $20 level,
you get to participate in a quarterly group coaching session with Coach Don Troutman. And you also receive everything from the other levels.
So it'll be like you hear at the end of most of these episodes where someone is bringing a pretty specific thing. We're brainstorming together. We're thinking of a next action step.
Yes.
And at the end of this episode, actually, she does not do it. She said she's going to set up a separate exploratory coaching session with me. And just a reminder that anyone could do that. You do not need to be a guest to set up the free exploratory session with me. So that's 25 minutes just to see if we gel, but it's not pressury. It's, are we a good fit? And we really do an actual thing like you're hearing in the episode. You really will receive some coaching, and this is a good time. I have a significant number of clients who are taking sabbaticals this summer. And so I have time. I have time for you.
Yes, that's awesome. And both the coaching and the creative container will be great for any of our listeners who have projects that they are dreaming about and wondering about how to move forward. And I guess, so yeah, circling back to what you were saying, it does feel like a creative time and new things are coming to life. Yeah. I'm excited for our listeners to work on their things that are being born in this new season.
And we have such a creative guest today, Rev Lizzie. Follow her on Instagram, first of all.
Yes.
She is coming to New York this Thursday. So if you happen to be listening local to me, she mentions it. It's at St. Bart's, probably on their website.
Yeah.
Or she might be coming to a place near you.
She's touring around to different bookstores and also churches where she has connections. I loved talking with her about the different things she has going on. So enjoy this episode. Lizzie, nice to meet you face to face. I'm Ruth, and this is Dawn.
Hi, Dawn. Hi, Ruth. So great to meet y'all face to face. So glad to be here today.
Thank you for joining us. And how is the weather down in Texas today?
It's lovely and chilly. I'm delighting in that. We've got a nice crisp spring day, which is rare, but a delight when it happens.
Excellent.
Where are y'all?
I'm in Minnesota, and Dawn?
I'm in New York City.
Amazing.
We're making a nice triangle today.
Yeah.
But thanks for coming.
Lizzie, would you mind taking a few moments to introduce yourself to our listeners?
Hey, y'all. My name is Lizzie. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm an Episcopal priest and the vicar and founding planter of Jubilee Episcopal Church here in Austin, Texas. I'm also the author of the recently released book, God Didn't Make Us to Hate Us, 40 Devotions to Liberate Your Faith from Fear and Reconnect with Joy. And I also have a podcast with a fellow clergywoman called And Also With You, with my friend Mother Laura. I love to bedazzle vestments. So I feel like those are probably the highlights for this crowd of creatives here.
Excellent. Yes, I'm so glad that you could join us. And there's so many things that I want to talk to you about today. So your book just came out in February.
Yeah.
How has that process been with sharing it with the world now?
It's really exciting. It's a tender and vulnerable thing. I felt well prepared for it. I make a lot of online content and I'm a priest. Mostly it's been really lovely because it was mine for so long. Unlike when you prepare a sermon, you might be working on it for a couple months or a week or a few hours, but then it's released. Maybe you get immediate feedback, maybe you don't. But the thing about this book, it was me, my agent, my editor, and the creative team at Torture Peregrine. And so it's been delightful to finally share it. And the reception has been wonderful.
Tell us a little bit about the writing of the book for you and how that process unfolded. Had you had this idea in mind for a while?
I mean, I've wanted to write a book since I was a kid. I wanted to be an author before I wanted to be a priest. It feels like God gave me the gift of calling me to both in parallel to each other. But I remember the first time I read Pastrix by Nadia Bolz-Weber, which I realized I read 11 years ago. I read that book and it was the first time I read something and I was like, oh, not just maybe I could be a priest, but maybe the priesthood is for me too, because I loved how fiercely authentic she was. And that book was just so compelling. And it was such a blend of memoir and preaching and her sermons, especially now that I'm in the craft, I can see how she's reworked some sermons and turned them into chapters. That was the moment that I was like, oh, I want to write a book like this that speaks to the heart of Christian faith as I know it, that I don't often see on billboards anywhere in the United States, that I don't often see on the faces of my peers when I say at the time when I was in college that I was a Christian, and now when I'm wearing a clergy collar, right? There's a lot of fear, there's a lot of trepidation, there's a lot of, Christianity kind of has a deserved reputation of being rude, put it mildly. So I knew that was something I cared about in my ministry in a multilateral way. It's why I was called to be a church planner. It's not something I sought out. It's something the diocese I work for asked me to do. The actual creative process of finally getting to write the book, I'll share the first time I was approached to write, I said no, because I was getting ready to have my oldest daughter, and it killed me a little bit.
It's not the right time.
Yeah. It was devastating to say no to what felt like a lifelong dream. I had to trust that if it was truly for me, it would come back around. I was at my absolute creative limit. I was creating a life. And motherhood, right? So I knew and hoped and prayed that opportunity would come again. So I connected with an agent and told him, I need you to boss me around with this a little bit, but I need you to boss me around in 6 months. So we started talking at the end of 2022. And I said, okay, mid-2023, I think I'll have enough stability in my ministry because my church signed a lease. So we're in a strip mall, we're like very Catholic maximalist Episcopalians. So we've got incense and we're chasubles and we're in a strip mall. It's just like a delightful little contrast. But I said, I think in 6 months I'll have enough work stability. My daughter would be approaching 18 months, so I would have some motherhood stability. Like that's going to be the prime time. And he did what I asked and was like, all right, time to come up with a book proposal. So we spent the month of July and August. He was a great creative pusher, but I really sat down and did all the creating. I took 2 months to craft the book proposal, which included a full outline of the book, all the devotions, and a writing sample that was the introduction to the book, the introduction to each section of the book. There's 4 sections and 3 sample chapters. So a pretty sizable sample of what I was hoping to write. And then we sold the book in October, and I wrote it November and December and had a full manuscript turned in the second week of January.
That's insane.
It was insane. It was unhinged, honestly. It was unhinged. But I also, you shared that you're a mom of a toddler. Like, I was like, this is the window of time, because I also knew that we were going to try to have another kid. I was like, it's going to happen now, or it's going to happen in like 2 to 3 years. And so I was like, I want it to happen now. It feels spiritually ripe to happen now. And really the writing of it was just, I think because I'd been sitting on it, that it just came right out. There was definitely some reworking we did of several chapters, but the edits were a pretty smooth process because it was a clean manuscript from the beginning. So there's nothing like knowing you're on a deadline to have a really focused first draft.
Yes. And I was listening to you on another podcast, and you had talked about this library in Wales that you stayed in. You stayed for a week. Can you talk about this? Because this place sounds like somewhere I need to go.
It is absolutely somewhere you need to go. It's magical. They should sponsor me. And by that, I mean pay for me to come back, because I'm telling everybody about it.
Yeah.
They should be a sponsor of this podcast.
They should. Honestly, this is their target audience. So it's this place called Gladstone's Library. And it was William Gladstone, Prime Minister, his personal library and estate. And so it's like this gorgeous Mr. Darcy estate house, right? That they have transformed into what were the servants' quarters are now like rooms you can stay in. And what was their ballroom is now a dining hall. And it's a theological library. There's a pretty robust collection of scripture and theology books. I claimed a desk in the liturgy section, which was very helpful because there's a lot of prayers in this book. And I stayed for a week, and it was wonderful. My husband and I celebrated 10 years of marriage, so we went for 10 days together, and he came for the first part of the trip, and we did some traveling and stuff. Then the second part of the trip was like, I am coming home with a completed manuscript. And I had about 75% of it done. So it was editing and writing 25% of the raw content and polishing it.
It's always about that end run. You just have to separate yourself and do it.
Yeah. One of my best friends, the Reverend Angela Tyler Williams, was like, Lizzie, you just made your own finals week. Yes. Yeah. Oh, God. It was a dream. I'd take breaks and go for a walk in the Welsh countryside. I had dinner at the pub every night. It was ridiculous. It was a dream.
That sounds so great. And so the book is out in the world, and tell us what you've been doing to help publicize this book.
Oh, my gosh. So I've been doing a little podcast tour. So thanks for being a part of that. And I've done an in-person book tour, which sounds very fancy. And it's been lovely. And it's also me calling up all my clergy pals being like, hi, who's got budgets to bring in a speaker?
Right.
How can the book tour double as a trip to see friends? That's exactly what we've done. So we did some stops locally in Austin and San Antonio. And then I'm from North Carolina originally. So we did some stops in North Carolina, some stops in DC, and a stop in Pittsburgh where I'd never been. So that was really beautiful.
Great rivers right there.
It was gorgeous. I all the bridges. I feel like Pittsburgh, people need to put some respect on its name. It's beautiful. And I'll be in New York. I'll be at St. Bart's Episcopal Church for Imagine Worship. And then I have a few more, a second leg lining up in the fall in Western North Carolina, South Carolina, possibly also Alabama. So it's been really delightful. Because I'd never done a book tour, I was like, how do we make it fun and sparkly? And so we've done friendship bracelets at every stop. And I've had chats with friends. It's just been a great time.
You're like the Taylor Swift of the Episcopal circuit.
Trying to be, I guess.
Friendship bracelets, bedazzling.
Yeah.
Calling up your friends.
I love it.
Literally.
Yeah, that's great. And so is there anything else about the book that you'd like us to know? Because I have lots of other topics to visit with you, but what else would you like people to know about your book?
I kind of told you the creative process, but the reason I wrote it is we are aware of some great resources out there on the market, but the average bookshelf at Barnes & Noble or any bookstore labeled Christian devotionals is not particularly populated with theology that I find liberative or reflective of God's love for women in leadership, God's heart for queer folks, God's co-creative capacity in the world. I think, frankly, most of the devotional genre is either very shallow, like happy, clappy, positivist theology that's just keep smiling even if it's rough, and that's the measure of your faithfulness. Or it's like outright terrifying theology. Like actually the book that mine keeps dancing with on the Amazon charts is a book called Toxic Empathy.
Oh, no.
A subtitle, How Progressive Christians Exploit Christian Compassion.
Man.
I've been
that a
seeing
bummer?
on little clips of talk shows that there's a big push against empathy right now.
There is, which is just wild for a faith that is predicated on
Yeah.
God who decides to dwell in human flesh to show how much God loves us and cares about us and expresses solidarity with our experience, particularly solidarity with the suffering that we experience in this world. So this book is meant to be something that takes all the delightful, rich, robust theology that I learned in divinity school. Often people would say to me, oh, that's so cool that you think gay people aren't going to go to hell. Do you have a book that I could read? And I'm like, yeah, I've got a few, but I also have mostly these tomes from grad school, right? My queer theology reader. And so I'm trying to take that and translate that rich theology with a lot of footnotes so that people know that this is not something that just comes out of nowhere, and say this is for the 16-year-old who's never heard that God loves them. This is for the Bible study we love that our faith says that we can vote in these politically progressive ways, but we don't know where that shows up in scripture. So it's trying to speak to folks who have always heard progressive theology in their politics and not in the church, and so they want to connect the two, or folks who know that there's like something in the Bible for them, but mostly they're like, I don't know about that, and tries to offer an invitation into the divine mystery of God and into life with God. And the 4 sections are on God, the Bible, which is really like the Old Testament section, a Jesus section, and an eschatology section, but they're all called things like Liberating Jesus or The Great Hereafter. And really, it's a systematic theology in devotional form, which sounds crazy, but I do think I pulled it off.
Yeah, it's
Yeah, so a devotional, I think actually the quote on the back that my friend Erin says, a devotional for those of us who side-eye devotionals. This book will restore your faith in an ancient, wild, and wily God. Yeah.
How has it influenced? I feel like you are uniquely positioned, having not grown up in Texas, but moved there. So you're an observer of the culture. You are among very conservative overall people, but you're in Austin, which is known to be more liberal. How does that all mix into this devotional book?
So this is a book that takes very seriously the faith of people, whether or not they grew up in a blue dot in a red state like I did. I'm used to that. I grew up in Chapel Hill, North Carolina. My congregation, Jubilee, is a gorgeous place. And one of the stories that I often hear from parishioners is, I tried going to a more progressive church after leaving my fundamentalist, high control, insert denomination here, because there's a whole swath of them. I tried going to a progressive church, and they said they believed all these things, but boy, they didn't really live it. My conservative church had a lot better sense of community and would show up for me when my progressive church would vote, had no issue with my identity or my politics, but didn't know how to be my neighbor. I think that's honestly it's kind of my hottest take, but it's something that I think a lot of us in the church have known for a long time. And also we're really having to grapple with on a massive geopolitical, theological scale right now of how do we live our values? And I talk about this in the book in such a way that if joy is what we are striving for, right? Because God's justice is God's joy. We do believe that it gives God joy to see the flourishing of all people. Then that joy has got to be a part of the means for the end for which we strive. And I really wanted this devotional and deliberately entered the devotional genre because it is so often, I think, scorned by more thoughtful, erudite, progressive folks. That's just for those stupid Christians. Guys, not everybody who goes to a megachurch is stupid. Honestly, a terrifying thing.
It wouldn't work. I mean,
Yeah,
it's a major business. Someone must be smart there.
And also, there's a lot of faithful people who've never been told that you can use your brain, and they're already using their brain with their faith, right? And that's the thing about in a lot of more conservative churches, there's a lot of folks who's like, yeah, the preacher says that, but we're still going to love her even though she had to have an abortion.
There's the exception.
Right, like that love, I deeply believe in that capacity. And I wanted to offer a book that said, you don't have to give up on Jesus. You don't have to give up on the Bible. And in fact, the most traditional biblical value you could have would be to wrestle with God and use your whole mind and your whole doubt conscience, curiosity, and compassion and bring it to a conversation with God. And so this book doesn't just teach us about who God is, but helps us know God better through prayer and community building. I've seen how this book is already both on the book tour, but also the book clubs that have been sprouting out. Like my dear friend Molly, who's in the Outer Banks, has started a book club. I have several friends who've reached out saying, I've never held a book club before. I've never been part of a Bible study or a small group, but I really wanted to read this book in community. And so we're doing it. And I'm like, oh my gosh, it's almost like the church planners.
You are.
Encouraged you all to be church planners.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, you were talking about church planting. And so how did it come about that you are doing that now?
When we first moved to Texas, which was not a place we ever thought we'd end up, my spouse and I, we're not Episcopalian when we started divinity school, and then we became Episcopalian. I don't know if you know much about the Episcopal Church, dear listeners, but we're a little fussy. They wanted us to do a year of residential Episcopal seminary. There's a fabulous seminary here in Austin called Seminary of the Southwest. My husband was put forward for ordination before I was, which was a tough thing in our life, but we really felt called to Austin because I had a job lined up through the grace of God with this wonderful church called St. Michael's, and he was going to do his Anglican year. We thought we'd be here for a minute and then leave. Clearly God had other things in store, in part because the Diocese of Texas was just so gracious and so welcoming and so excited to have us, which was just really a beautiful and healing experience for us. And so I was hired as the family minister at this church. I was in charge of children's ministry, parent groups, the nursery, and all that sort of stuff. At this point, the MPP, the Migration Protection Protocols in Trump 1.0 came down, which were horrific. And through a parishioner at the church, we found out firsthand accounts of what we were seeing on the news. We had this direct connection in Brownsville, Texas, whose sister city is Matamoros in Mexico, of folks who had come to the border, often on foot, over thousands of miles from South and Central America, but also folks who'd been coming in from Africa, from the Middle East, like from all over. This was one of the main entry points into the U.S. for people seeking asylum. The borders had closed, and so people were starting to camp literally within sight of the United States with no resources. And so our friends in Brownsville were driving through McDonald's, buying as many Happy Meals as they could, driving across the border and feeding as many people as they could. And we're putting out an all call saying, we need help. And there are folks who need to eat. And I said, this is definitely not in my family ministry job description, but I care deeply about this. And this was a church with a lot of resources. And so I started organizing basically once a month pilgrimages where we would go to the border and we would meet with some local organizations there to hear about the history of how this community had experienced being a border town and how this community cared for people from both sides of that border. The main thing we did is we cooked food. We'd rent these ridiculous huge houses with industrial sized kitchens and pack everybody in. We'd get up super early, make a bunch of breakfast tacos, and then walk across the border with these wagons to feed folks. And our friends who'd been driving through the McDonald's eventually got organized, and they turned into an organization called Team Brownsville. So we started working with Team Brownsville, and they were a bunch of special ed teachers. This was truly the most grassroots thing. And so we'd cook a big breakfast and a big dinner and serve that meal. And the word got up the chain to my bishops that this new lay minister was organizing this effort. And so Bishop Kay Ryan, one of the first things she did as new bishop was come on this pilgrimage. And from that, I started being approached by all these people in the diocese saying, ever thought about planning a church?
Of course.
So my suspicion is that those two things are connected. It's wild because I think a lot of folks think it was because of the ministry I was doing on social media, but actually the ministry I was doing on social media was just an extension of the ministry I had always longed to do, which is to care for and feed people. In 2020, when I started making content online, it was feeding people spiritually because God knows we couldn't be around each other in person. Right. So that's actually how I got called to be a church planner.
You are better than most on social media, I will say. That was my only impression of you before this. I was like, I'm going to look at her Instagram. You do quite well with it.
Thank you.
Courage is something that can work for your context.
Yeah. I think it's because I just try to be really playful with it. I don't take it too seriously. The work is very serious because if y'all have seen all this new data that's coming out of the Pew Research Forum, how more Gen Z men affiliate with Christianity, right?
Yes.
And it's like the alt-right pipeline. We've known this for a long time, is that social media is a pipeline, particularly preying upon young boys and men and radicalizing them into very scary right-wing extremism and several degrees, softer than that. So it's a very serious thing to me of like, no. Most people don't know about any kind of expression of Christianity that is liberated or liberative. But people, I think, are longing to know about that. And I want, if it's 1 out of every 1,000 thousandth video that comes up when you search #Christian to be something saying, hey, God loves you.
So rare.
Amazing, right? But I also want it to be interrupting on the more progressive side of things, the doom scrolling and the like, we're all doomed. Everything's terrible. There's no joy left. Because that's actually what Empire wants us to believe, is to give up and think there's no hope. So intention with a lot of lighthearted Dolly Parton.
But Dolly Parton's doing major things to change the world.
She sure is.
Everyone loves it.
She sure is. Big blonde hair and a joke always tucked in the corner of her mouth.
Do you try to set out to do a certain amount of posts a week, or do you have goals with that, or is it just when you find time?
It's just when I find time. I will say I feel like in this particular season of life with book stuff, I've really been like, I want to get 4 to 6 posts out every week. And it's also, I would feel a lot of urgency in Lent anyway, because it's such a prime time for people, even people who don't really know what Lent is, know when Lent is happening. I'll have a big sort of energy through June, and then you'll probably notice I'll get very quiet in July and August, because I usually take 4 to 6 weeks off, and I might have some stuff that I've pre-scheduled. But a fast fact I like to share is my church jubilee in our first year of life. We're now in our third year. We had over 200 first-time visitors, and 150 of them found us because of my personal social media. So
there it is.
It's very much a part of how we've grown as a community. And it's not that they found us because there was a big treatise on the Jubilee year in Leviticus 25. They found us because of a goofy little, like, here's my favorite travel bowl. You know?
Right. But also using the actual trends.
Yeah.
I saw a couple that you were using the popular trend, but you're clearly walking into worship.
Yes.
And so then did the podcast grow out of your calling on social media, or was it its own thing? How did the podcast come about?
2 years ago, my dear friend Laura DePanfilo and I, she is Laura Peaches on Instagram, Mother Peaches on TikTok, started a podcast after she had lovingly badgered me for a year to start one. She was also making content online. We, in the way that we, I think, disarmed the algorithm or infiltrated it, were these goofy little videos of 2 very nerdy Episcopal priests who also were becoming moms. We had our babies like a month apart. We're interrupting, I think, the folks who had never heard of the Episcopal Church, much less women clergy, much less any expression of Christianity that they found hospitable. And so we were getting thousands of questions. It got to a point where we were like, but there's some things that you can do a pithy answer. There's some things you can top level address in a 1 minute or less video. But there's some stuff like, what is baptism? You can get a little taste of it, but we wanted to offer a resource for folks who were like, no, I really do want to dive deeper. At the same time, we saw the need amongst our colleagues of, we were engaging with, in marketing terms, a target audience of unchurched folks who were curious, or unchurched or out of church or rejecting church folks who were curious to come back into church, but didn't have the lingo or the know-how that I think a lot of, speaking specifically as an Episcopalian, a lot of Episcopal churches assume. So the joke I like to say is, you know, when you put Holy Eucharist on your welcome sign, the only people who know what that means are the people who are already there. And so how do we offer a gentle but educational equipping of folks with this rich theological tradition that we have? And also, how do we recognize that most people these days do not stick around for a long formation hour? I think they do at big resource-sized parishes, but it's really hard because the pace of life in this late-stage capitalist system is impossible. But people will listen to a podcast on their commute to and from work every day. So all of this kind of coagulated for us, and we were like, we want to make a podcast where each episode is a question for 30 minutes to an hour of what is baptism, or the episode that we've released recently is, wait, the rapture isn't real? Because this is a thing that, like, I've had parishioners who I never would have thought were like, oh yeah, I've left fundamentalism behind, but I didn't realize Episcopalians didn't believe this stuff. There's just so much that we can offer. And also, we found it's really refreshing and helpful for folks who've been in the church for a long time who are like, I actually did always wonder that. And it's a hard sale, I think, to be like, come to our Lenten series on what is the Eucharist.
Right. No one's coming to that.
No one's coming to that. But I think if we do a fun, you know, we've built some trust with our audience to say, no, believe us, this is going to be interesting, but you got to come along for the ride for a minute. So that's how the podcast was started, and it's grown. The balance we're trying to strike is that it's evergreen content, meaning that there's certainly some seasonal dimensions to it, but you can come in, you know, we did a bunch of Lent, like what is Lent stuff last year that we've been able to repost this year because it's still relevant. It's stuff you can use for your Sunday school class or your small group, but it's also relevant to this cultural moment of trying to attract and then empower and educate folks to be fully incorporated members of the body of Christ, knowing what that means, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
I love that you could send a potential member who's interested. You're like, here's a playlist.
Yeah,
Over
that's
the next couple
literally,
weeks.
yeah. And we hear feedback from folks all the time that they do that. And I certainly use it all the time. It's part of our baptism prep now. I send them a baptism episode and I say, listen to this and come with your questions. And that gets us into a deeper conversation when you have a limited amount of time.
It's like a flipped classroom.
Yeah.
It's wonderful. I love it. So in addition to Nadia Boltz-Weber, who are some of your favorite creators?
I think in the theology realm, I love Reverend Dr. Wilda Gaffney. All of her books are a huge influence on me, and her scholarship and the way that she's released these women's lectionary for the whole church. Like just in and of that, she's recognized the need for us to hear proclaimed in the context of worship women's stories that are in the Bible, but certainly not part of the sort of regular Sunday rotation. But she still also recognizes that's good news for all people. She's offering that from the top. That's her goal. And it's just beautiful to see a biblical scholar who is doing that work of translation, not just in the academic world, but the translation for the sort of average lay parishioner. It's just beautiful to me and really inspiring. The late and incredible Rachel Held Evans is a huge inspiration and influence on me. My friend Candace Marie Benbow and her fabulous book, Red Lip Theology, is just fantastic. I think she and I have parallel interests in reaching folks who've been hurt by the church and also speaking back to the church saying like, y'all can also do better. One of my favorite Instagram creators who's also an author is Megan Jane Crabb. She's incredible. She has written a lot, created a lot of content around body positivity, body neutrality, so loving and accepting your body at every size. And I doubt she would call herself a theologian. I've never heard her specifically talk about religious content, but I find her to be a brilliant example of lived theology, of like how we don't apologize for making ourselves smaller, but live into a big and beautiful life because it is a big and generous world for all of us. She's really inspiring to me. There's a lot of artists I love. Danny of And Her Saints on Instagram is an incredible modern icon writer. I just love their work. In terms of music, I love all the greats, Lady Gaga, Chapel Roan. But I also love Emily Scott Robinson, an incredible folk artist. Her song, The Time for Flowers, is really special to me and one that I listen to a lot. And the sort of gist of the song is, why plant a garden when the world is ending? And it's like, actually, the time for flowers will come again. That's been a big message in my own life right now.
Thank you. And how do you see creativity and spirituality connect?
To me, they're almost one and the same. I know that when I have not taken time to be creative, both the creativity that I'm constantly outputting, be it sermons or goofy little TikTok reels or Instagram.
Yeah.
I love to make things that never see the light of the internet, so to speak. I love making my home really cozy. I love making things with my daughters. When I don't take time for that creativity, my spirituality just dies. It doesn't die forever, but it's just not alive in a way that it is when I take that space and time. I've made this joke before, and I'm glad you're asking this question. It's actually been on my to-do list to make this a reel for a long time. I pray with rhinestones, and someone's like, what do you mean? And I was like, y'all know that the way that we have the Bible is in part because a bunch of nuns and a bunch of monks for a long time hand lettered, they called it calligraphy, but like hand lettered, hand wrote over and over the passages of scripture so that we could have multiple copies of the Bible. And that was not just a function of ensuring that the scriptures were copied and that there were multiple copies available. It was also a form of prayer. There's something mind quieting about a repetitive, gentle, deeply reflective space of creativity. For me, the joke I had with my husband when I finally finished the last round of edits on my book, because I wrote it in 4.5 months, but then it was like about another 6 months back and forth of editing the manuscript with my editor, as I'm not allowed to start writing book 2 until I've glued 10,000 rhinestones, because I need to give my brain a reset. It's very tiny, repetitive actions.
Yeah, I love that.
Do you ever get pushback from like official Episcopalians about rhinestones on chasubles or whatever you're doing?
God, yes. And my gentle response to that is twofold. One, the content I make online is not for people who are already in the church. I'm delighted that folks find it joyful, but I'm trying to do real evangelism. And I think Any genuine evangelism is going to put you in places that will make people who are deep inside the institution a little squirmy.
Yeah.
Because, hello, I'm trying to reach folks who aren't there.
Yeah.
And that doesn't mean compromising on the call of God. It doesn't mean compromising on the things we believe, but it does mean getting clear about what have we made idols of in the church. You know, the example I often reflect on in the Episcopal Church is a lot of Episcopal piety is seen as very quiet, very contemplative, a lot of silence. It is absolutely, indisputably true that silence can be a profound way for common spirituality to be expressed. I love our liturgy, but where I get nervous, where I get a little critical, is when the notion of silence as spirituality is conceived of as the only appropriate way to be gathered as a body before God. That starts to make me wonder, are we using silence to create space for God, or are we using silence to silence people who make us uncomfortable? And my church is really loud. We got a lot of kids running around, and we also are a genuinely multicultural space. So a lot of expressions of faith and spirituality that are not predominantly white, not predominantly upper class, not predominantly American, are not silent, which doesn't mean that silence can't be a part of that life of faith. That is the sort of in worship example. And I translate that to, okay, so me gluing rhinestones on chasubles. First of all, if we're going to start being critical of vestments, let's think about the $1,500 chasuble. Artists deserve to be paid. This is the tension I cause. Yeah. Artists deserve to be paid for their work. Art is necessary for survival for all of us. And certainly the church has a great and storied history of being a patron of the arts. I think that's important that we continue that work. But I think the Venn diagram of folks whose churches have multi-$1,000 vestment sets and the circle of people who think it's like trashy or in poor taste that we are upcycling vestments at Jubilee and putting rhinestones on them is a circle. I would press in on the classism of that and what we value as art, because having something that's beautiful and a genuine offering to God is going to look different in different spaces. I want to embody the values in what I wear in worship that show all people are beloved and sparkly in the eyes of God, that we can be thoughtful consumers of clothing waste in the world. I think being thoughtful about upcycling or finding new life, breathing new life into old things is a deeply Christian value, old things made new. And I also think that part of the way any progressive church, and particularly the Episcopal Church, which has such a history of colonialism, such a history of rich white people nonsense, part of how we confront that and change that is at every small detailed level of how we view holy worship. And I think having means, the materials, our material life in worship being something that lots of people can see entry points into matters. And I love like a $1,500 Watson Co chasuble. Don't get me wrong. But I also think it's the chasuble that I loved making the most was one of my mom's old chasubles that I dyed pink for Gaudete, because Gaudete is in Advent, and so it's such a time to be close to Mary, and she's sparkly because she's sparkly. And also there's like really high-end, like Juliette Hemingway makes incredible church textiles, and she uses rhinestones. She just doesn't use as many as I do.
Reaching those who aren't there and being joyful about it. I bet the printing press was hated by those nuns who their whole devotion was copying the Bible, and all of a sudden they can make 100 in a day or whatever rate. I know the printing press was still slow back then, but faster than a nun.
For sure. So there's space for all of that, right? Space for the devotion and the craft, and like artists deserve to be paid. And there is also value in art being accessible. I mean, I think whenever that conversation comes out sideways in the Episcopal Church or in any church, right? Because I know this is an ecumenical context. It's always like brushing against something that's really big, actually. That Christians have always fought about art and extravagance. There's a reason why iconoclasm was a thing.
So part of our podcast is that Dawn, who's been a coach for many years, offers coaching to our guests. If there's something that you're currently working on or thinking about working on, would you like some coaching today?
Oh my gosh. The things I would love coaching on, I probably can't do on a podcast.
I understand that. That's fine.
I think Dawn, I'd love to connect with you another time.
Yeah, Ruth can send you the calendar to the free session and we can do it another time.
Thanks, Dawn.
Yes.
That's no problem. Thank you so much for spending time with us today, Lizzie. This has just been a delight, and so many blessings to you as you continue continue to share your book with the world.
Thanks, y'all. Thank you so much for having me. I'm very
Oh.
thankful for you and thankful for y'all and for your ministry in the world. It's just beautiful to behold.
Thank you, and have a good rest of your book tour.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for joining us for Created Creative.
We're so glad that you could be with us. And please remember to follow us on Instagram and give us a rating and review wherever you listen to podcasts. And remember our Patreon. We'd love to have you be part of our community
And go create something.
or create something.